Okay, so I wanted to end today with to reiterate a few tips about the assessment for this class. Students have said my last video about the qualitative essay was helpful. We have the revised problem statement due this Friday. The final essay will be due before we know it. We're going to try to turn around our feedback on your uh, revised problem statements as quickly as possible to allow you as much time to write the best essays that you can. But I wanted to reiterate some of the tips that I had mentioned earlier to basically engage with the class. Engagement with the class is one of the best predictors in my analysis with the quality of the assessment over the course of the term. And I know you have a bunch of other much other demands on your time, both personal as well as academic. But I wanted to try to encourage you to try to engage with class as much as possible. I've tried to put as much material as possible on Waddle as well as on my own website. And the goal is to try to learn the research design process. This isn't necessarily a quantitative research design class. It is a research design class. It is trying to get you to think in a clear, descriptive, and causal fashion about outcomes that you care about and use the appropriate method, whether qualitative or quantitative, to be able to evaluate your theories in the real world. We're writing at the end of the term a 3,000 word essay that takes the best of the previous theoretical analysis that you've already done and the qualitative evidence that you did for the first major essay and use it in the last essay. And through this multi-method approach, it's something that's gotten increasing attention in political science as that kind of best practice in which you have a question and you're approaching it from different angles. Like in the previous video in which I said you try to use as much different types of evidence as possible to try to make sure that the relationship is real and you can reject the null hypothesis. That also carries through with using a mixed method approach in which you're looking at cases as plausibility probes or hypothesis generating, and then using the quantitative data analysis. For the problem statement for this Friday, you only have 250 words. In the first problem, often students would spend too much time talking about the relative literature and the research question and basically completely overlook the argument, hypothesis, and evidence section. So I wanted to encourage you in one concise paragraph to use a couple of the best sentences from your first work if you're focusing on the same topic. Talk about your research question, brief statement of your argument that you think that you're going to use, and the observable hypothesis, kind of like I showed you from my own work in one of the earlier videos for today. And then talk about the evidence. The evidence is going to be the main differentiator between your first problem statement and the revised problem statement. And it's really highlighting what you actually plan on doing in your final essay. You're not just trying to come up with a problem statement and talk about evidence that you might want to do at some point if you do your dissertation or if you inherit $1 billion, but actually try to describe what you're planning on doing for your final essay, because that'll allow us to understand what you're trying to do, help clarify your research design, and to try to point you towards the best connection between concept and measurement as we can. So in the evidence section, concisely, what quantitative data are you using? I'm interested in democracy. I'm going to be using the varieties of democracy data from 1990 to 2010. Why do you think they measure a theoretical concept? Varieties of democracy has a liberal democracy index that includes measures of both electoral competition as well as protection of fundamental rights. What's your unit of analysis? It's the country year, it's the individual, it's the group, whatever it is. Be clear about what the level of analysis is, because that's important for the reasons I mentioned in the previous video about making sure that your theory and your evidence are working at that same level. What is your spatial and temporal coverage? Some students were unclear. I'm going to look at Chinese economic development, but they're not telling us whether it's economic development from 1986 to 1995 or 1995 to 2010 or 2010 to 2020. These are very different time frames within that country, and you really could reach completely different conclusions looking at different spatial units or time units. And so that's why it's important to be clear about what the time or spatial domain is you're really focusing on, what kind of descriptive and inferential methods you plan on using. I'm going to look at the mean value of this in this country or in these 30 countries, or I'm going to use the inferential method by using ordinary least squares to look at this dependent variable, including these three causal factors or whatever, and then how you tie your results back to your argument and hypothesis. If I find a positive correlation between democracy and economic development, that will speak towards my argument and hypothesis. You want to draw it full circle, right? Like with the causal, the scientific method graph that I included back in week 1 and week 2 and repeatedly weeks. It's not just enough to have the cause and then the test. You have to draw conclusions from the test and link it back to your cause. So hopefully that helps with a couple of main points about the problem statement. Let us know if you have any questions. Final essay structure is pretty much traditional essay structure, although of course this is a research design class. So you want to highlight connections to the research design literature and the topics and the terms that we've used in this class. You can use text from your previous assessments for this class, not for 1009, not for other classes. For this class, it's okay to use the text from the previous assessments. The research question, the argument and hypothesis might be identical, they might be different. Research design, results description and discussion, and then conclusions. And the balance is up to you. Some people will merge the literature and the argument sections. I would encourage you just to have a clear organization to your essay, a clear statement of what you're trying to say, how it's different or related to the literature, how your argument is connected to your evidence, i.e., have an explicit hypothesis, and then to have room at the end to highlight your important points, alternate explanations like the Posner article did for this week. So he had a main argument that he was trying to make about how the size of the groups determine whether they're electorally useful, but he looked at other alternative mechanisms and then the strengths and weaknesses of your approach. This is where you can highlight the fact this is an undergraduate essay. You're just doing these things sometimes for the very first time, that you realize what mistakes you made during the process and what you might want to do in the future to build on your strengths or reduce your weaknesses. This just shows that you're becoming a researcher in recognizing the assumptions that you've used, what you've done well, what things you might have missed or didn't have time for, what you've abstracted away, and what future you or future other researchers might want to do. Hopefully that gives you some ideas, and if you have a solid process, if you do have a creative idea, that can really be influential. For the Posner article, the article is 15, 17 years old now, but it's had a huge effect on both the use of natural experiments as well as the way that people view ethnicity in a comparative framework. The Lijphart article for this week was even more highly cited, and that article I haven't spent as much time with today, but is really stressed the different kinds of case studies that we've already touched on before and the usefulness and the strengths and weaknesses of the comparative method. And if you have a strong argument that people can understand, that you describe your data in clear ways, then they're more likely to be able to understand and be persuaded by your argument. And that's what we're really trying to do, is to learn something about the world and be able to describe it to other people. So that, use the lectures, readings, and exercises to your advantage. If you've done the readings, hey, might as well try to figure out ways, even if in a footnote, it can be relevant to your paper. Use the type of descriptive and inferential statistics that we use in the class. show you understand what they are, what they're telling, and why it matters for your argument, why it's important to understand, or what conclusions we can reach for just the mean level of a variable. What's the mean literature rate in your sample, and why is that interesting or important? Use clear structure and try to be creative. I included in that theory section in week 2 for how to come up with good ideas. What really is at the kernel of that is as much of an art and science, but it's willing to take a risk, to push, to use an argument from one area and apply it to someplace else, to uncover something that other people hadn't seen before. Undergraduate level, that's less important, but just trying to use different things that you might have come across in a new or creative way. And it takes practice. It's hard, but hopefully you'll learn a lot that will hold you in good stead, not just for this class or for your major, but in your career going on and how you think about the world. So with that, I look forward to reading your revised problem statements and to engage in an ongoing discussion about the kind of methods that we all use and how we can try to connect them as strongly as possible to the theories that we have. And with that, I'll see you in office hours and in the tutorials with the tutors. Let us know if you have any questions, and I thank you for your time.